Hello folks, today I'm going to explain to you what Aperture is, how to set Aperture, what Aperture to use for the Canon G7X Mark II. So what is Aperture and why is Aperture important? Your Aperture is your depth of field that allows you to choose between an extended depth of field or a shallow depth of field, and it's really all down to your own creative outlet. It also determines how much light you let into the camera. If you have a wide open aperture, you would have a shallow depth of field, and if you have a narrower aperture, you have an extended depth of field. Now it also determines on how much light is being let in. The wide open aperture, and you can see at the front of the camera in the lens of the Canon G7X Mark II, if you set it to a 1.8 aperture for example, you would see the blades open up wide open, and that will allow you to shoot shallow depth of field. Whereas at f11 you will notice that it changes, the blades close down and there's a very narrow hole, and that means you're going to get an extended depth of field. Now I will go into further explanation into another video that when shooting something that's extended depth of field, there is less light into the camera, and therefore you may have to compensate with, of course, the shutter speed and of course the ISO. Whilst it is true that you would use an extended depth of field for shooting landscape, and you would typically use a shallow depth of field for shooting portraits, there may be a certain circumstance that you wish to photograph a subject and say it's a person, but you did want to have the background in focus, then this is the power of having the control over the aperture. So how to set your aperture is fairly straightforward on the Canon G7X Mark II. It's a simple case that you may have to go into the menu setting and go into the first menu, and under the first menu you have record mode. You either have the standard or manual setting, and if you choose manual mode, it will enable you to shoot and manually set your own shutter speed, your aperture, as well of course your ISO. You will notice the three boxes at the bottom. It's the second box where it says f1.8 or maybe it's f2.0 or whatever that's set at. This is basically your aperture, and this is what you use to set. Using the f1.8 would enable you to have that wide open aperture, and just fiddling about with it, you'll see that stopping it down to f11 will have darker light. There's less light into the camera. Likewise, when you have the wide open aperture at f1.8, it will enable you to allow more light into the camera. So what aperture should you use? Well, it really depends on what you're looking to photograph. Shooting a landscape shot is very much different from maybe you want to photograph a person and blur out the background. It really all depends, and it all depends as well, of course, on the available light. It's all down to understanding the relationship between the ISO, the shutter speed, and of course the aperture. And in order to get the correct exposure, you may then have to change the shutter speed in relation to where you are. For example, outside on a sunny day is going to be very different to the exposure that you would get indoors. That's why it's important to understand the relationship in order to control that. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask me, feel free to ask me in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, it helps a lot, and of course thank you for watching, and I greatly appreciate it. Cheers.